Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to address the conference. I'm very disappointed that I can't be with you, but these are difficult times. But it's very important to me to have the opportunity to share some of the work that we have been doing at the OECD, because I think it underpins just how important the work is that you are doing in enhancing the quality, increasing the extent of career guidance in Spanish schools. And so I'm going to share with you some of the findings from work we've been doing over the last 2 years about what really makes a difference in career guidance. Does it really work in changing the employment outcomes of young people? Do they find better jobs? Are they more likely to find a job because of the work that you may be doing in the schools that you work in and people are doing around the world? And let me start by giving you a quick overview of the work that we've been doing here at the OECD. It's our career readiness project. And our starting point is that young people never left education more qualified, never been more ambitious, but in many countries, including Spain, they struggle to find good work. And in periods that we have at the moment, the risks of difficult school-to-work transitions are much greater. And we're going to know that young people are at a disadvantage in the competition for work because compared to older workers, they have less experience, they have fewer useful contacts, they have less know-how about how work works. And so it's important that schools develop the career guidance systems to help students prepare for the labour market. But in this, our question is, well, what works? And that's difficult because young people at 13, at 15, at 17 engage in different activities, but do they really work? Well, one way to find out if they do or not is to use what's called national longitudinal surveys. And they're not available everywhere. They're not available in Spain, for example, in terms of the questions which we want, but they follow young people from childhood into adulthood. And so we can see in some of these surveys what sort of things that young people did as teenagers while they're in school, what sort of activities or experiences they engaged in, which are career related. But also we have some information about their attitudes and assumptions, what they think about their future careers while they're still in school. And then we can see, what happens at 14, 15, and then 10 years later, we can use statistical analysis to see, does it make a difference? So we control for their academic achievement, we control for their social background, their gender, and so on. All the things which normally decide and influence who ends up where in the labour market. And we can see what makes a difference. And through this, we can start establishing indicators. And if we find things in multiple countries, we can say, well, we can be confident there's a consistent pattern here, that young people who take part in these sorts of events can expect to do better in the labour market. They're at an advantage. And we've published some of this work already. You'll see here a couple of publications which are available in English. And our final results from this project are going to be published next month in October, a free online conference in English, but you can register today if you want to get involved. So I am going to immediately tell you the results. This is what we're finding. This is where we find consistent patterns. We look to see if we find evidence in a number of different countries, a minimum of 3 different countries. Not every longitudinal data set asks the right questions for us, but we see evidence in these different countries related to lower unemployment, to higher wages, to higher degrees of career satisfaction. We can say there are indicators here, there are relationships which are important to be aware of. And we group these into 3 areas. The first is around how young people explore their future while they're still at school. And so this is what we find, that their career conversations that they have. They get asked, have you talked to somebody, particularly maybe a teacher, about a job you're interested in? And we find relationships that the young people do better. Really importantly, the young people, when they engage with actually people in work, career talks, who are coming into school, job fairs, workplace visits, job shadowing, all these select score well. One thing which is a surprise for us, young people who take part in application and interview skills workshops while they're in school do better later on. And also, occupationally focused short programs. So this is short vocationally focused programs which take place within general schooling. Very popular in the United States, in Australia, and Canada. And they've got good evidence that they actually do make a difference. And probably, though we don't have enough studies yet, things like career questionnaires, career classes. And in the exploring area, what we see is young people actively thinking about their future, inquiring, investigating possible futures. And this is all by the age of 15. Secondly, we have quite a bit of evidence about how much they experience potential futures in work, actually going into workplaces and doing jobs, the sorts of jobs that people might get paid for. There's lots and lots of evidence around part-time working. If it particularly is, if it's less than about 10 or 15 hours a week, part-time working is pretty consistently associated with better outcomes for young people. Volunteering, we've got a small number of studies now, but a sufficient number of studies to recommend that volunteering, particularly where young people are volunteering in the community and workplaces, makes a difference. And probably we think work placements as well. And it's just we haven't got enough evidence. So it's not that we have all the studies and the studies are saying the wrong thing, it's that we just don't have enough evidence, enough studies yet. And what we find is that the exploring and the experiencing side influence how young people think about their future. And this is something which is really interesting to us, and something I think which surprised us a little bit, that some of our strongest indicators relate to pretty simple questions which can be asked of young people about how they think about their futures. So a simple one is career certainty. You ask somebody at 15, what sort of job do you expect to have at 25 or at 30? Well, across the OECD, maybe 25% of children, young people, don't know. They can't answer that question. And that's an indicator that there's potential problems ahead. We find that the more ambitious young people are in terms of the sort of jobs they want to do, the better their outcomes, including young people who go through vocational education routes. Career alignment is when we ask young people, what sort of job do you expect to get? And then if they also plan to have sufficient education, which is normally required to do that job, say, for example, I want to be a lawyer and I plan to go to university, you're aligned, but an awful lot of children are misaligned. They underestimate how much education they need. And for us, that suggests a degree of confusion about how education works, how education relates to kind of future employment. And we see that as well in this fourth category of instrumental motivation. In terms of instrumental motivation, that's the ability to be able to see that your schooling is valuable and useful to the employment you expect to get later on. So it's questions like, is school a waste of time? Will school help me get a good job? And we find there that if young people don't see that connection, they're at a disadvantage. And finally, kind of career originality. That's an area where, also we're, it's only just on our list where we kind of see that young people are, if they have more original thoughts about their futures, it suggests that they've thought about this more. And so what we see here is a kind of like a process. The more they explore, the more they experience, the more their thinking matures. And we see this going round and round in a circle. But the young people need to be prompted, they need to be challenged. And this is by the age of 15. And it shouldn't just start at 15. It should start well before, because your processes of thinking and reflecting about who you are and who you may become, and how you might manage your way through your education system begin at a young age. We would say primary school. Primary school is really important to start, this thinking, not to, give work placements or so on, but to bring people into school to help them see the relationship between the education they're doing and an imagined future in work, to help them visualize and begin planning, their way through education. And so our question which we can ask is, well, how does Spain do? Well, at the OECD, we run something called PISA. Every 3 years, we ask hundreds of thousands of young people around the world, representative samples of young people at 15, all sorts of questions. And some of those questions relate to career guidance. And, we've been interested recently in combining three, very simple activities, which we would say all young people should have by the age of 15. Having spoken to a career advisor, having attended a job fair, having visited a workplace. And we find in Spain, you'll see this here, down in the corner, it's only about 8% of young people in Spain. Now, you're not the worst, but there's a long way to go. And we would say that, in all countries, the great majority of students should have done these simple things by the time that they are 15. Now, I think one thing to stress here is that young people really need sort of like opportunity to mature their thinking. And that comes from the sort of challenges and the encouragement and the enabling activities which people who work in career guidance and schools which value career guidance can do. So your work is really, really important. And we would argue that, never before in human history has career guidance been so important. because young people are staying in education longer, but they've got more difficult decisions to make because the labour market is so disrupted, it's so turbulent these days. Technology is changing the way that that work is arranged. Jobs are emerging, green jobs are emerging, other jobs are disappearing, jobs are changing radically because of automation and digitalisation. And then suddenly, over the last couple of years, we've had the COVID epidemic, a massive disruption to the labour market, which makes it so important that young people get good advice. And going back to that point I made earlier about direct engagement with the labour market, it's really important that they get to hear for themselves and see for themselves, people who work in economic sectors which they're interested in. Who better to tell somebody whether it's a good idea to train to work in tourism than somebody who works in tourism, who knows how tourism is going to develop. But the people who are least worst placed to make a good understanding about what the opportunities are people who work in that sector. And when they see people in those sectors, they believe that information so much better. They think that it's, as long as I'm not trying to sell them anything, they feel they can get authentic, good advice, which they can then relate to their own selves and their own situations. Now, I want to share with you just quickly now 3 examples of activities from around the world, which we think align with sort of empirical findings which we've been developing here. First one is about primary schools. There's a program in the UK called Primary Futures. Young people need to start their career thinking young, need to broaden their career thinking. We know that many young people have very narrow perspectives about what they might do later on. Assumptions, stereotypes need to be challenged. Is it really reasonable for girls to become engineers or work in constructions? Can boys work in childcare? The best way to challenge those stereotypes is by, showing young people, people for a minority gender actually work in those areas, and to really help students understand this relationship between education and employment. So Primary Futures is a really interesting program. It uses online technology to allow schools to find people in workplaces, to invite them in to talk about the jobs they do. So the volunteers don't need to train very much. They don't need any training. They don't need any preparation. They come into the school and they talk about the job they do. We kind of find that's very popular with primary schools in the UK. Secondly, I want to talk to you about a program in New Zealand. This is the other end of the school system, upper secondary students. Speed Meets is the program in New Zealand. Over an hour, you can imagine students go from table to table to table. I'm having one-on-one meetings with 10 employers. These are employers who are interested in hiring apprentices or doing work placements or hiring new staff. And, the school enables them to have a discussion, a 6-minute discussion, by the end of which the students and the employers indicate would they like to meet again. And if they do, there's a match. Their contact details are exchanged. And it's a very simple way of broadening the aspirations, broadening the connections of young people, allowing them to speak directly with potential employers, and now allowing them to practice their interaction with employers. And you can do something similar at a much younger age. This kind of carousel format is very effective for kind of job fairs, career talks. And then thirdly, I just want to talk to you about a really, really simple idea, which any subject teacher could do. There's a great bit of practice in France, where as science teachers are introducing a new topic for study. It might be electricity or water. They ask students to research online jobs linked to the profession, linked to that subject, and they have to answer questions about what the jobs entails, what the education requirements are, what the pay and conditions are, often aimed at young people 12 to 13. And I think this is a really good way of encouraging and enabling students to start that process of seeing a really firm relationship between what they do in education and what happens later on in employment. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Good luck with the conference. The work you do is really important. In October, we'll be publishing some suggestions and tools for schools and for education systems at a national or a regional level about what our indicators are showing in terms of what effective practice is, really looks like based upon, the best possible evidence which we have. So, do stay in touch, visit our website, come to our conference, subscribe to our monthly newsletter, and good luck with your work.